Very good.
Well, hello, everyone out there. My name is Chris. I have a channel here, The Reconverted Catholic. And today I have a special guest here, Father Charlie Goraieb from Our Lady of Mount Carmel Parish here in Arizona. Father Charlie is now the head pastor there too. There's a recent transition in the last few months, and he's now assumed responsibilities there too. And he's also heading up a evangelization effort, and we'll be talking about some of that today. So we're actually going to cover a couple of topics here, and I'm really happy to have Father Charlie here too. Gotten to know him a little bit here recently, and looking forward to talking to him more and working with him more. So we're first going to start with Father Charlie's own conversion story, actually, to the Catholic faith, and it's a pretty interesting journey. I'm going to have a link to the full story out. It's out on the Our Lady of Mount Carmel site. So I'm going to put a link to that, and I encourage everybody to read it. Strongly encourage. It's actually a really fascinating story. It's awesome. I loved it. I read it twice, as a matter of fact. I tried that much. It was great. So Father Charlie's going to give a few highlights from that. So maybe we'll spend a few minutes, 5-10 minutes, or about 10 minutes, talk about some of the highlights. And then we're going to talk more about the evangelization effort, what is in the works with that, and especially for we as Catholics, what we can do in reaching out in our evangelization efforts, and really identifying some of the pain points, side of difficulties we've had, and how we can really get out there and share the truth of our faith and lead people to Christ. So thank you, Father Charlie, for being here.
Chris, it's a pleasure to be on your channel, and I really appreciate the work you're doing.
Well, thank you.
So, yeah. So a little bit about my story. I guess I'm part of the reverted group here, those Catholics who have left the church and then came back. My parents raised us all Catholics, but when I was in high school, I fell away, and so did my siblings as well. I'd have to say it was a combination of teenage rebellion, which is universal and perennial, but also I think at that time our faith wasn't really taught to us in a way that was personal. There was a lot of doctrine and a lot of ways of living the faith that had to do with the rules and the importance of the faith, but we weren't really encouraged to connect to it personally. So I left the faith and entered college. I graduated from high school in 1965, and so when I was in college, the whole flower child and movement and love movement, and as well as the anti-Vietnam War protests, were just beginning to emerge. And so during my 5 years in college, they were really probably the most tumultuous years. They were the famous 60s that everybody talks about, especially 1968, 69. And I got caught up in that. And particularly in the political realm, I became very attracted to Marxism and some of those ideas of social change. When I graduated from college, though, I was disillusioned with the conflict and the strife that underlies so much of that class warfare that Marxism is built on. And I began to search, okay, what is a way of life that I could live that really brings me interior peace? That was my quest. And I've always been a reader, always read a lot, always very curious about different ideas, lifelong learner. And I began a search that led me to travel around the country. In those days, you could hitchhike anywhere you wanted. All you had to do is you had to have a beard, and that was kind of your badge. If you had a beard and long hair, and if you had a guitar in your hand, 2 or 3 cars would screech to a stop for you. So that was the culture of that day. So I traveled around the country, experimented with different things, and I was looking. I went to different communes, different groups that seemed to have something special. And there was a kind of a circuit in those days where you'd meet someone and say, oh, yes, I was in Seattle a couple weeks ago, and there's this group there, or I was in Cincinnati, and there's something going on there, or I was in Dallas, and people would travel all over the country, looking for something, looking for that unique thing, which we now know is Jesus Christ. But at that time, it didn't have a name. I couldn't name it. And that search led me to a variety of different manifestations of people trying to answer the eternal question of who am I, why am I here, where am I going? These are the questions that every human being tries to answer, needs to answer. And I experimented with Oriental religions, the I Ching, transcendental meditation, yoga, Buddhism. Did a lot of reading on the yogis, the gurus, the people who were supposedly people who had wisdom, and it would inspire me temporarily, but it didn't have lasting power, at least for me. And finally, in Seattle, I mentioned that, I did meet a group of people who were Christians. I'll say in quotations, if you look in the book of cults, they definitely were a cult, but the Lord used them to speak to me. They claimed to be Christians, and they really adhered to the Bible, or at least they hung on to the Bible. I can't say that they lived it out in retrospect, but they were the people that God chose to speak to me and to influence my walk. And it came through the leader who challenged me to read the New Testament, something as a Catholic coming out of the pre-Vatican II, 1960s era. Catholics didn't read the Bible on their own, generally speaking. So I'd never read. I was familiar with many of the stories, having heard them all over and over in church and in CCD, as it was called in those days. But I decided I was going to take up his challenge, only to be able to show him how wrong he was. So I began to read the New Testament, and of course that begins with the Gospel of Gospel of Matthew, and I was truly amazed at what I discovered in reading those pages of the New Testament, the beginning of the New Testament, to see what an incredibly attractive figure Jesus is, and how wise he was, compared especially to these gurus I had been reading, who really they were just spouting off, their own ideas. And here was someone whose wisdom was arresting, and that really attracted me. I just dove right into and began to just devour the New Testament. And in the midst of that process, I had a totally unexpected. Now I was in Eugene, Oregon. We had this group I was with. We had traveled to Eugene, and I had this very powerful encounter with Jesus Christ that was life-changing for me. And that was really what was missing in my walk with the Lord, at least for me, that I didn't know the Lord personally. And as I began to discover him in the scriptures, he was merciful enough in order to reveal himself to me spiritually. This morning's reading was from Romans chapter 8 and verse 11, that the Spirit that raised Jesus Christ from the dead is alive in us. And that's what I discovered, that the Holy Spirit, the very same Spirit of Jesus himself, was alive in me, and I could communicate with and be in relationship with Jesus. And that began for me a quest. I just changed directions. My compass turned, and I went another direction, headed towards Christianity. I spent about 3 years doing a DIY version of Christianity. I don't recommend it. There's a reason why Jesus formed a church, so that we wouldn't be as easily deceived as I was, plus that we would hear the truth. And even if we should stumble upon it, we may not always recognize it or understand it clearly. And what I did is what any red-blooded American would do, is justify the scriptures in order to conform to my understanding and desires of what I wanted to do. And that was about a 3-year process, until finally the Lord helped me by allowing me to meet a wonderful priest who challenged me in really a very humble and a very perfect way for me, in order to be able to listen carefully to what he was saying and to take a look at the church again. And through a series of steps, including going back to Mass and then coming back to my parents' home and going to confession for the first time in 8 years, which is parenthetically one of the great sacraments of the church. That's one of the reasons I'm so in love with this, with the priesthood and with the ability to hear people's confessions, because all I have to do is recall the great freedom that I encountered when I made my confession after such a long and difficult and confused time in my life. And got involved with a Catholic Charismatic Covenant community. The Charismatic renewal was really just on the ascendancy in that time. This was in 1975. It was very much in the ascendancy, and that's how Catholics were experiencing a Pentecostal version of Christianity, but rooted in the sacraments as well. It's like you had the whole enchilada. You didn't have to pick one. It was everything, and it still is. It always was, but it just takes a little bit of breadth and a little bit of investigation and time to discover that. And that eventually that group, which I joined over a period of 11 years of working with them, growing in my faith and in formation, excellent formation with this group, that led me ultimately to the seminary, which I'd been thinking about on and off throughout that whole period of time. And then at a later age, when I was 44, I was ordained a priest for the Diocese of Phoenix. And it was just, it has been just a tremendous privilege that I'm so grateful for, to have had this call in my life, someone so truly unworthy of this privilege of serving the Lord as his priest.
Yeah, that's so incredible, really. And you're giving, again, a kind of just, bullet points version of your journey and your story. I encourage everyone out there, you have to read, the full version of it really on the site too. And that's why I have to have it linked below here. So I have a comment, and actually just a couple of questions to that real quick. The comment I was thinking when you mentioned about being kind of a hippie at the time too, I was thinking right when you said that, I was like, okay, well, I have the beard and a guitar, so I would have been 2/3 qualified
to get picked up.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Right. Question two. So in your, becoming ordained, right, an ordained priest, the two, was there, just real quick, what do you remember, for example, that was the real kind of clincher of that, of knowing that you wanted to go into seminary? With, I mean, of course, based on your journey, it all kind of led up to that. But
right. Well, I wanted to preach, and I knew you had to be sent. I did know that, and I wanted to forgive sins. That was a big one, because again, my experience of having been absolved of my own sins was so liberating, and all of that came together in the evangelization work that we did in this community. And we would go door to door in our neighborhood. In fact, this neighborhood of this parish that I'm in, because this was the parish that I lived in as a layman when I moved to Arizona. And we would go door to door. We would go to, in those days you could do it. We would go to the county fair, the state fair in Phoenix, and we would go to the airport where there was no TSA at that time. You could just go into the airport and sit with people who are waiting for their flights and talk to them about the Lord. The Hare Krishnas were doing it, so why not us? Right. And we weren't asking for money. And so I discovered that in this desire to share my faith with others, that people would often, if they didn't blow us off and they were interested, they would ask, what should I do next? And of course, that would be go to confession and come back to the church, or become a Catholic, because this is the one true faith. And I felt like I wasn't empowered to take people to that next step. I was a lay person trying my best to do evangelization, but I wanted to be at that other end where I could really, if to use a secular, close the deal for people.
Right. Yeah, excellent. Well, and that actually segues into evangelization, because that's the next topic here too. So let's talk more about that. First, let's start with, I know in a recent conversation you and I had, you've always, for quite some time now, have been fascinated with apologetics, very interested in it, and of course evangelization, and ultimately, that being leading people to, again, the truth of our faith, leading people to Christ. And so let's start with, your vision first for, for Our Lady of Mount Carmel, what you're looking to do with evangelization, with that. Let's start with that first. What's your initial vision? And of course, your interest is apologetics, tying that in together.
Yeah. Well, at the beginning of the show, you mentioned that I'm new at the parish. So I'm still at that stage where I'm trying to understand what are the dynamics of the parish, who are the people who are committed to these to these ideals, and just to get to know the community. So I'd have to say it's still really in the investigatory stage, but I see in evangelization that there are a number of pieces that are interconnected. You can't have one without the other, but they all have to be there almost simultaneously. And so I see a need to stir up the members of our parish who are committed, who do love the Lord, stir them up with a desire to share their faith with others. For many historical reasons, Catholics are not zealous about sharing their faith in general, unless you've had some encounter, unless there's been some awakening in your soul. But generally speaking, Catholics are many Catholics are very prayerful, very holy, very committed to the church, love the sacraments, and are living it out in their families, in their workplace. But when it comes to sitting down next to someone on a plane and sharing with them that you belong to the one true faith founded by Jesus Christ, only through whose name you can be saved. And there is no other church, no salvation outside of the Church of Peter. That's not a conversation that most people have when they get on the plane. They ask for peanuts and tomato juice on a good day. And that's kind of the first step, is awakening Catholics to the need to do what St. Paul says, woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. Then connected to that are opportunities for not only those Catholics, but Catholics that they're people they're in touch with, people they communicate with, to have a transformational experience that leads them to a personal encounter with Jesus Christ. And our liturgy, which is sublime, our liturgy is the one true worship of God through his Son, Jesus Christ. Exactly the worship that Jesus came to give us. But it's not, generally speaking, an evangelistic event, an evangelical event. It is initially for the initiated. As I've mentioned before, in the early church, that was the role of the ushers, to make sure that after the preaching, if you weren't already an initiated member, fully initiated into the church, if you were a catechumen or a visitor, they needed to remove you from the church before the creed. The creed was the symbol of faith. It was something. So all of the parts of the Mass from then on were considered to be only for the initiate. Now, that doesn't mean that people can't come to Mass for the first time and have a profound encounter, but that's not the design of the Mass. God can break through any way he wants, but we as a church have to have opportunities that are a low-level entry, easy entry for people to have this encounter with the Lord. Then they need to be integrated into the church. And here's another area that I love the church with all my heart, but I can look at her and see her warts as well, and her flaws. And this is one of them. We're not great at welcoming the stranger, and we're not even great at welcoming those who've just been lit up. How do we integrate people and create community for people so that they really experience being a part of the church? Then how do we equip the saints so that now they can confidently share with others their experience? And that's where apologetics and content formation come in. So all of those pieces, it's like when you're putting a bicycle together, you have to put all the pieces together, otherwise the bike won't run, it won't work. You can't leave the pedals off. Everything has to be on there. And so somehow we have to construct a way of life in all of our parishes that include all of that. And it requires a work of the Holy Spirit to really animate parishioners and get people on board, all of whom will bring their gifts to bear and create the different pieces that are necessary for this to take place.
Yeah, so on that note, then I'd like to get your thoughts, just like on this, or briefly on this, because it ties into a video I released sort of recently. And what it is occasionally, or I recommend other videos out there that I think have really good subject material, or something that can be really useful as a teaching resource or apologetics resource for our faith.
Sure.
Rather than me kind of reinvent the wheel, because there's already a lot of good stuff out there, and if I can recommend it, I also do that. So there was a video from St. Paul Center recently, and the title was "Should the Catholic Church Impose Itself on the World?" Right, and by impose in this case is, should we go just how you were describing earlier, of be able to sit down with somebody and, do you know God, right? And have that conversation, right? And believe, do you understand that, coming to Christ, what that means, and then our faith and the truth and beauty of our faith. So kind of long story short, something that captured my attention in that was how we've been accustomed as a society, very much in the secular world, and I think among a lot of Catholics too, and just people in general, of religion as a private affair. That's how they refer to it in the video, right? And so that speaker in the video was saying, he made this big distinction between, between religion being personal, like that's your relation or your faith. Sure, your faith journey is something, between you and God, as far as how you're building that relationship with God and being in accord with God, that communion with God. But then sharing the gospel is not, a private affair. It's something we should be sharing with the world and revealing and teaching this, right? So I'd like to get your thoughts on that. It actually does tie in what you were just talking about a minute ago, because I guess in one way, I'm sort of validating what you just already explained with it, is that, yes, a lot of Catholics just haven't been very used to, like, compared to, say, our Protestant brothers and sisters, where they've just, anywhere from mild to sometimes extreme and everything in between. And that's a whole other conversation itself. But I've learned, because I have some, Protestant friends, and they've, it's so interesting how sometimes it's just so simple and direct how they're delivering the gospel. But yet we know that there's a whole other part to that, a very important part, all the sacraments that we receive right through that, and our church, and being under one Catholic, Apostolic Catholic Church. So your thoughts on that though too, like,
sure.
As far as a private affair versus a personal thing, and how we're
sure. Let me just refer as well to the Protestant approach. Part of it is there are historical reasons why they are so zealous about sharing what their beliefs and inviting people to their churches. There are historical reasons, practical reasons, and their theology is very bite-sized and very compact. It's not complex. Just hear the 4 spiritual laws, accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, and you're in. And Catholicism, which I think is more accurate and more faithful to the scriptures, is a lot more complex. So there are reasons for that. But to go to your question, it was Pope Benedict XVI, and also Pope St. John Paul II before him, that the church doesn't impose, but the church proposes. And that's a distinction that may not have been made clearly in that video. I don't know. I haven't seen it. Yes, we are not to impose, because we have free will, and no one should feel like they are being manipulated or coerced into accepting your beliefs. So we don't impose our beliefs, but we need to propose them, and we need to present them in a way that says, I am a Catholic, and this is why I love my church. This is what I believe about Catholicism, and this is what my beliefs and my faith do for me as a man today, and what I believe and trust one day will bring me to an eternity. And to be able to have that in your hip pocket, and to be able to share that, the elevator speech, the coffee at Starbucks for 20 minutes, or over a period of days with someone who will begin to ask questions, is very important for Catholics. And I think that we have to get over the idea that somehow we are imposing ourselves. Imposing yourself is manipulating people, telling people they're going to hell if they don't become a member of your church, or if you're at work and you are an employer or a supervisor, and you command the attention of your employees, you're taking advantage of your power leverage. So we don't impose, and we've learned our lesson, because I think one of the sad historical realities, and it's a minor issue, but our Protestant brothers and sisters and secular historians as well use against us, is the way that sometimes our heavy-handedness throughout Christendom, throughout the time when the whole world was Catholic, and there were some historical reasons for it. Most of those people don't make their critiques in their historical context, so they don't really understand what was taking place. But nonetheless, the idea that we impose ourselves on people through our faith is no longer, by any stretch of the imagination, a Catholic understanding. However, we have to be careful not to go too far to the other side. Some people will misquote St. Francis, because St. Francis did not say, preach the gospel and use words when necessary. That's a misquote. I dare anybody to find that for me. I've searched for it. I know others have searched for it. It's not there. St. Francis was very vocal about what he believed, and so should we be. But we do it in such a way that respects people's freedom. But if people see that we are convinced and full of joy, that's what's going to attract them.
I like that too. So let me ask this now, and this isn't meant to be sort of like a curveball here too, but let's kind of dive a little deeper about that now. So yeah, you're ready. Okay, good. So knowing that, right, Mass, and I'm with you on that too, of being more for the initiated and understanding that experience, especially the core of it being the Eucharist, right? And accepting that and understanding that and being able, at some point to go and receive that, okay, and all that entails. So if we put that, so to speak, aside, right, and we don't want to, yes, of course, be manipulative in any way, really impose how we're teaching and out in participating in evangelization, then what have you found to be effective, meaningful, really truly authentic, meaningful ways to evangelize and lead people, again, to our faith, and something outside of Mass, right? Something to help bring them along and teach them. Yeah.
Right. And just to back it up a bit, as a priest, my job is to empower the lay people, empower the parishioners to do that. And so I have found that there are those transformational moments that can be very helpful for people. That, like, for example, the Acts retreat has lit a lot of people up. I've found that Life in the Spirit seminars, when they're well done, or sometimes even healing services. I've done a lot of those. In fact, we're going to be doing one here in November, where we pray over people for physical healing. And it's amazing what God will do if you just put yourself in that position where you're dependent upon him. And so having opportunities for people to have this encounter with the Lord, parishioners, and then once they've had this transformational experience, this mountaintop, it could be Cursillo, it could be any kind of a retreat, it could be a number of things, it could be in adoration, but people through a variety of ways get lit up. Now, how do you direct that? That's the next question, because they're the ones that are in the marketplace, they're in the workplace, they're in schools. I'm in the parish. I'm stuck. I'm not in any of those places. So those are the people that really need to be encouraged. So that's always my beginning point. How do I start with the people in the pew, help them to get lit, help them to equip them, and keep encouraging them to go out? In my previous parish that I pastored, we had the Acts retreat. I don't know if you've heard of it. It comes out of San Antonio. Oh, good. And I have found that to be a really good device, a really good vehicle, because the men who went on it, and the women, they came back on fire, and they wanted nothing more than to share their faith with others and to grow in their faith with their brothers or sisters. So that's one, but that's only one among many. There's just a whole menu. There's a whole buffet of ways for people to encounter the Lord will make himself available to us any way that we seek him. But once that takes place, then you equip people. Okay, now here's what you do. This is the next step. You learn how to give your testimony. That's crucial. I mentioned that already. To know how to give the 3 parts of your testimony and to do it in an effective, purposeful way. The way I wrote the testimony that you've cited on the website, to give your testimony in a purposeful way, to be able to share the gospel, to be able to answer people's questions. And if you don't know the answers, don't be afraid to say, you know what, I don't have the answer, but I'll get back to you, because I know there are answers to that. And that's, our catechism is the great resource. Our faith has been so carefully chronicled and thoroughly analyzed, you might say, what is it that is necessary? What do we believe? What is the deposit of faith? It's so carefully iterated in our catechism and categorized that anybody who wants to be able to explain the faith can do it through the catechism or asking someone who's more knowledgeable. So that's where I begin. I know I'm kind of straying from your question, Chris, but I begin with trying to get those in the pews to fulfill their role, because the Second Vatican Council demands that the laity be the source of evangelization and the renewal of the world. That's their job. That's their vocation. The laity we've drawn the laity back into the church, and they become inward looking in the church. Wrong method. The laity need to be empowered by the church and go out.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And this is all good context too. I appreciate this, because then this leads to the next question, right? Let's say, right, now we're talking a little bit in hypotheticals, but let's say say at Our Lady of Mount Carmel, okay? Let's say we have a bunch of parishioners now energized or re-energized and whatnot, and they want to go out and share the gospel and share our faith or participate more in that. So say fallen away Catholics, right? Because there's another sort of elephant in the room, folks who have fallen away and they're kind of lost now. And it's interesting. I kind of, in the people I talk with, engage with, and out there in teaching apologetics, it's a mix of folks, but it's always interesting talking with former fallen Catholics, because that's a whole other conversation in itself, can be. But what would you say once that's happening, we're having that, that energy and that movement? It's like, how can we best reach then first fallen away Catholics? Yeah.
I would, in the old days, it would be the Thomas Brothers maps. Today it would be the Google Maps. I would have a Google map of our parish,
yeah.
and I would divide it up into small two block squares, and I would train people on how to go door to door and to do the St. Paul Street evangelization, but to do it house to house. And simply, hello, my name is John Wilson. I'm from Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and we're just visiting the members of our parish. Is there anything that we can pray for you? If you're interested, here is our list of masses. Here is our confession times. Here on a week from tomorrow night, there's going to be an information night on what it means to be a Catholic. I would really love to invite you to come to that. So you have that planned already. That's a piece that's there, so people have an invitation to make that would help those fallen away. And you go to meet them. Now, many of those fallen away people fall away from the church for all kinds of reasons. Some of those they have a grudge. Some of them are deep into sin. Some of them were maybe hurt by the church in some way, real or imagined. And then others just fell and their hearts grew cold and they grew further away, and the church has very little sway in their lives. But they really, if you ask them, they really don't have a reason why they're not going to church. There are a lot of those people, lots of those. Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's it. Yeah, but this is good info, yeah, because it's certainly something, and it's all part of this, what we're discussing, reaching out. And now I'm having some ideas, which we could talk about that in a minute.
Right.
with me sometimes. I hear one little kind of spark and I'm like, I think I have an idea. But let me ask this then too. Okay, so for the folks, and this is also a growing, okay, factor in discussing our faith and just and about this our faith journeys in general, and that is the rising population, especially within the last 20 years, is what we know as nuns. Now we're close to 20% of folks who identify as atheist or maybe agnostic. Here in the US, there are a large segment of people who identify as spiritual but not religious, which sometimes that can be a little kind of muddied because it can mean a whole wide variety of things, really. And then kind of, again, folks just searching and seeking or coming up with their, they're kind of, I've called it sort of like, build a religion or build a spirituality, maybe even sort of like kind of cafeteria shopping or something like a la carte, kind of religion. Like I like this and from this faith and I like this. And then I hear a lot of sometimes with it all kind of wrapped up in, as long as we all love each other, that's all that matters, right? But for the folks out there where this is becoming much more and more popular of, well, I'm spiritual, but I don't know what else I want to believe or whatnot too, as far as connecting with our faith and the truth of that, right? What have you found to be beneficial, or at least, and again, in your dialogues about it, or just experiences?
Yeah, well, I can't say I've had a lot of dialogues with people in that category. I've heard a lot of conversations, and I've listened to a lot of Catholic commentators and people who are involved in those conversations talk about that. And it's not metaphysically possible to have a spirituality divorced from a religion. It's not possible. That's an illusion, because if you want a spirituality, you're talking about transcendence, you're talking about the world of mystery, and all of that by definition requires a religion in order to be able to grasp. So those who are saying that, what they're saying is I'm going to fill that hole with crystals or tarot cards, or I'm going to do some other things, just my own pagan practices, or I'm going to worship nature. But they're going to find a religion of a sort, because if they want a spirituality. Those who are nuns, that's another issue. But those who are, say, they're spiritual but not religious, it's a specious argument, I believe, and they don't. I think that's important for us to be able to show them that they've created a religion of their own, and they could compare it, but it might be a good idea to look at a religion that's been around a little bit longer and has endured the test of time. The question is another question that you raised are those that identify themselves as nuns or atheists. And I think a large portion of those, well, a small portion, are epistemic atheists, people who really have studied this, and they've studied philosophy, they've read, David Hume, they've listened to all the rationalist arguments, they've read the new atheist arguments, and they're convinced that there is no God, and they're even belligerent about it. And I don't know what you can do about those folks. You just hope and pray that whatever's driving them will just lose its steam. But the vast majority of people who consider themselves to be nuns, I believe, again, like former Catholics, have fallen into it. Their parents were maybe separated or divorced, so they were never really raised in a faith that had any kind of compelling impact on their lives, or they went to college and they became secularized in college. And so by default, they are non-religious, but they're more agnostics than they are atheists. An atheist, I think, is someone who just commits himself that there is no God. But the vast majority of people out there, if you press them, they say, well, I don't know. I just don't know. That they'll also say, I'm not interested at this time, which is that's what irks me, because there's an urgency here, hello, this is you're not really fully human until you ask this question of yourself. But I'd say the vast majority of people are agnostics, and I think that's a starting point for us, is to ask an agnostic, can you give me a compelling reason not to believe in God? Okay, and then can you give me a compelling reason to believe in God? And see if they're willing to answer that question honestly, and respect. Obviously, do it respectfully and carefully. But in my observation, I don't think there are a lot of truly epistemic atheists who've really thought it through, like an Alex O'Connor or some of that ilk, who are committed to atheism, even though they don't know really what they're talking about. But most, I think, as I said, fall into that default of being, I'm not religious and I'm not, but I don't really have an animosity towards religion. I'm just not interested in it right now. Or as one person put it, it was kind of a quip. He said, I have a girlfriend, we're having sex, therefore there is no God. And that's about it. And there it is. There you have the train of logic that has led a lot of people into this place where they don't have any real true belief in God. It's just they've fallen into a way of life where God doesn't quite fit in at this moment.
Right. And then compounds it with, which this is a whole other topic maybe for another time, is truth itself, and this real war over truth right now we see in society, which really sort of started out as something just more kind of a little more obscure, or maybe a very fringe minority position. Unfortunately, now with how it's portrayed, say, in media outlets, and because we have so much access to social media and getting kind of saturated with information, some stuff as far as like this idea of like everybody having their own truth, or forming their own truth, or whatever that means, and with their identity and whatnot, that obviously affects conversations about faith journey and what we believe. Because one thing I find that I kind of is, and I'm comfortable having the conversation and talking through it, but I can't tell how many times I've been told, or well, everybody has their own truth. I have mine. If it just works for me, like that, and then
right
for that, right?
Right.
Yeah, and it all kind of aggregates up to your point. That's what I mean of that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there are some who take it one step further and say there is no truth. There is no truth at all.
Right.
Of course, that statement itself is an absolute statement of truth in their mind. So it's a self-refuting argument.
Self-refuting argument. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I appreciate that. So let's one final question. So you gave your vision earlier, here when we started this topic too. So, but if you were to give sort of a map of, say, like, where do you see, once you even have a better finger sort of in the pulse of the congregation there, and just, and this can apply to parishes, of course, across throughout the country and the world and so forth, right? This effort, we all need to be out there and being part of evangelization. But if you could, like, where you see this, say, a year from now, right? What would you like to see, at least the first good milestone with?
I'd like to see that when people come to Our Lady of Mount Carmel, that they're warmly welcomed, and their names become known. If they're new, it becomes clear, and they are shown where they can derive information. And so I think the big W, welcoming and making people feel at home, because our parishes can be cold because we're so big and so pluralistic. Yeah. And we're very vertical, and we're looking upward, and that's a beautiful thing. That is beautiful. I have no complaints about that. When you walk into a Catholic church and you see that sanctuary lamp, you should be focused now on the transcendent. However, though, when people arrive, they should be welcomed. We should have parking spaces for them, for the newcomers. They should be, shown over to the hall, and coffee and donuts around the house. They should be introduced to other people. There should be opportunities for them to see, okay, these are how we get involved in the parish. Here how we can meet people. So that's a very elaborate first step, which is welcoming, being very welcoming. And also I would have these transformational experiences that we talked about, and also teach apologetics, teach people how to share their faith, develop a testimony, answer questions, and do so in a way that's charitable, incisive, intelligent, and effective.
Yeah, and I think just make a quick comment about that, right? When I reverted to Catholicism here, I've been, of course, I'm very much in love with our faith and wanting to get out there and share it and teach it. It's like a reframe.
Like you're doing a great job.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do, Father. And it's, I think I think sometimes, well, maybe I've just been so easily fascinated seriously in my life, too. There's so much I'm just amazed about the world around us all the time. It's also about our own faith. Like, it's still to this day, right? That yes, we have a 2,000-year-old church, given to us from Christ, and so much with it. And so it's interesting. I've talked with people who are so attracted actually to, you're talking about as far as vertical, just the whole order of what we have, right? Now we have a magisterium, and that we have a way to deal with scripture and our traditions and the sacraments, and so forth. It's interesting. That's so attractive to so many people, right? But then exactly getting in the door, right? So I really like where you're going with that, right? Because of course I can talk all day long about, if they could only see, right? But I'm kind of biased though in the end of the day, right, with that, because it matters to me. But I really appreciate this, Father. I do. I'm glad
you're welcome.
Join me here.
Good to converse, good to chat with you, and especially this topic. This is it. This is where we rise or fall. Right. Where we become an evangelical church, evangelical Catholicism. We are the original evangelicals. All you have to do is read Acts of the Apostles, the Great Commission. It was given to Peter, the first pope, and all the apostles. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. And COVID has kept people home, and a lot of secular movements have made people question their faith. And so now is the time for the church to be proactive and to assert and to be out there, proposing what she believes. The idea that somehow we build a church, open the doors, and wait for everybody to come, that's past. That era is over.
Yeah. And to your point just a second ago, we really should have been doing this all along, but it's kind of woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? We can't go back and change time, but we can certainly go forward, right?
Right. And so, it's very possible God has allowed this time to happen in order to shake us up to be able to do something that we need to do.
Sorry. Go ahead, Father.
I just want to make one point, though, because we can lose sight of this. A recent study just came out that the Catholic Church is growing everywhere in the world except for Europe.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I know, and unfortunate for sure,
but it means that some places, those who say, "Well, the church is dying," now that may be. In some places, the church is definitely dying. It's an old, aging church, but there are places where it's young, vigorous, and growing. Many places. Yeah,
in fact, just a quick sidebar. I read something recently, somebody forwarded over to me. It was this side-by-side, and I'm still, again, I read through it. It was interesting and just still digesting all of it. But this sort of side-by-side about the early Christians, I'm talking within the first century of the church and versus now, or compared to now, and how there's so many striking similarities, to that. And it kind of even ties into what you were just talking about a minute ago here, and right, and kind of feeling like, is it going to work? Is this really going to happen? And it seemed like it's fragmented, but yet there's consistency, and what are we going to do about it? And then we rose up out of it still, though. So, so
again and again. The Lord said, "The gates of hell will not prevail against my church."
That's right.
And so we have to believe that.
We do. That's right. Right. Keep committed to it.
Amen.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you again, Father.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Chris, and God bless all of your viewers and anybody who tunes into this recording, this video. May God bless you and your desire for the truth, and may the Lord lead you to what it is that you're longing for.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thank you for Father. That's a good note to end on too with that. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
God bless.